Hey everyone, happy Friday. I hope you've had a great week and enjoyed this warm weather we've had. I've got another art project for you to try, so let's go ahead and get into it. For this project, you're going to want a piece of drawing paper or watercolor paper, a pencil, and at least one crayon. The one crayon you need to have is a black crayon. White crayons are also really cool for this project. I couldn't find a white one, so I'm using an orange or yellow crayon for my stars. And then you're going to need a watercolor setup like we did for Georgia O'Keeffe. So watercolor paints, paintbrush, and water. Now before we really get started, we need to know a little vocabulary for this project. The first word we need to know is silhouette. A silhouette is the image of a person, object, or scene represented by a solid black shape, and the edges match the outline of the subject. So you'll see this a lot in paintings or photography. Here's an image that I took, and the silhouette in this image is the landscape, the trees and the ground that are all just black, but you see the outline against the sky. Silhouettes are created when you have a light behind the subject of your artwork. So it could be a person, it could be an animal, or it could be a landscape like mine. But the key is that your light source is coming from behind the subject. So the subject just appears to be completely solid black, and you only see the outline of the shape. A great way to do this project is actually breaking it up into two projects. So your first part can be trying to photograph a silhouette. A great time to do this is sunset, like I did with my picture here, because you have the sun, the light source behind your subject. But you could also try to set it up artificially. But that'll be the first step to create your photograph of a silhouette, and then you can use that for the basis of the painting we're going to do next. The next little piece of vocab we need to know is resist or crayon resist. We're going to be using crayon today. Resist is an illustration technique in which watercolor is painted over a crayon drawing, and the wax from the crayons resist the watercolor. So you can paint right on top of the crayon drawing that you've made. Okay, so let's get started. So you all saw the photograph that I took of the trees and landscape that was silhouetted against the sunset. So I'm going to use that for my project. And I do have a picture off screen that I keep looking at. Remember, we talked about how important it was to use your eyes and look at the subject that you're drawing. So I'm going to do that with this project as well. And after I just do a rough sketch, I go in with a little more detail. And basically what you want to do is create that line, the outline of the silhouette. And then everything below that line, if you're doing a landscape, is going to be solid black. So you can use your crayon to color it in. If you're not doing a landscape, it might be a little more complicated, the shape that you're coloring in, but just look towards your reference or your image photograph that you take to see how the silhouette is going to be formed. And once you've got your solid black silhouette, you have the option to do a few more details in crayons. I wanted to create the stars in my sky, which did show up in my original photograph. I couldn't find a white crayon, but a white crayon is great for this, and little kids really love that because you'll draw in white and forget that it's there, and then when you do the resist with watercolor, it'll show up. But I'm using a little orange for my stars, so we'll see them along the way. Okay, so now we get to do the watercolor part. Now, I'm going to go over a couple techniques for watercolor, things that we might have mentioned in the Georgia O'Keeffe project, but I'll give you a few more details about how to do them today. So what we're starting with for the very background, the sky, is what we call a wash. So if you see, I'm actually just putting down water to start. There's no paint on my brush. I'm just putting down water. And then when I'm ready, I can add a little pigment at a time. And the more water there is compared to the amount of pigment, then the lighter the color is going to be. So that's a good way to do things that are really far away, like the sky, and then you can add in more color gradually. Now I keep looking at the picture I took, and I noticed that there is some light coming from the center where the sun is setting right behind my silhouette. So I'm going to leave that part white for now. I know I'm going to go in with some yellow and orange later. And then I am noticing that up towards the edges, the color gets darker. So that's where I'm going to use more pigment and less water. And you can add more paint in, even if you've done a wash, to get that darker color. Now you'll notice I'm starting to go over my stars, and the water will go over it, but you'll notice as it dries that it'll resist any place that you've put crayon. So you can go right up and over the edge of any of your crayon drawings for your silhouette, and the crayon, the wax in it, will actually like push the water from the watercolor away, so it won't cover any of the drawing that you've done so far. This is a great thing to talk about with older students, why wax and water don't mix, and it's something that they might have heard in science class. So this is a great way to really see it in action. As I'm looking at my picture, I am noticing that there are some darker spots and there's some purple even in there. One thing that I'm not painting right now is the clouds. If we're looking at this composition, the background is truly the sky. And then we have some clouds, which are kind of the midground. And then what would be considered the foreground is the silhouette, the thing that's closest to us. So as I'm doing this wash, it's really focusing on the background. We're going to come back and put in some details for the clouds in the midground. So I did let my painting dry, and now I can come back and put in those clouds. Much like with the Georgia O'Keeffe project, where we let it dry and then came in with some darker colors for details, that's how we're going to create the clouds in this image. We don't want them to be totally opaque because clouds you can still kind of see through sometimes, but we do want them to have a little more substance than the true background or the wash that we did for the sky. So I'm going to lay in some darker colors. And again, we achieve those darker colors by using more paint and less water in our ratio. So rather than putting down a whole wash that's mostly water, you'll notice I'm going to the paint first before I touch it down to my paper. And here's my finished project. I love playing with silhouette and light, and I hope you enjoyed it too. I hope you learned a couple new things, and I hope you'll join me again next week for another Family Art Friday. Bye-bye.